The first rays of dawn painted the airport in a soft golden hue, the air crisp and still. Inside the terminal, at Gate 37, Ibrahim Traoré stood quietly, his presence unremarkable. No tailored suit, no security detail, no ostentatious accessories, just a man in a simple jacket and cap, blending seamlessly with the early morning travelers. To the casual observer, he was just another African heading home. But Ibrahim Traoré was no ordinary traveler. He was the president of Burkina Faso, a leader who shunned pomp and preferred humility. He traveled light, private, and unannounced, a habit rooted in his belief that a leader should walk among the people, not above them. Fresh from a high-stakes summit in Brussels, where he'd negotiated trade agreements, championed African sovereignty, and discussed the continent's mineral wealth, all he wanted now was to return to Ouagadougou. No fanfare, no fuss. As he approached the Air France flight, he greeted a baggage handler in French with a warm, "Bonjour, comment vas-tu?" The handler, a young man with tired eyes, smiled back, unaware he was speaking to the head of state. That anonymity was exactly how Traoré liked it. He boarded the plane quietly, offering a polite nod to the cabin crew before settling into business class, seat 2A by the window. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages about rural development projects back home. No one noticed him, or so he thought. A few rows back, murmurs began to ripple. A Dutch corporate magnate, Willem van der Berg, CEO of a multinational agribusiness, was also bound for Burkina Faso. Accustomed to private jets, exclusive lounges, and first-class everything, van der Berg was a man who wielded influence like a scepter. But at the gate, he was told business class was fully booked, and his usual upgrade to first class was unavailable. His face tightened, his voice sharp. "This is unacceptable," he snapped, his entourage of assistants nodding in agreement. The seeds of a confrontation were sown, quiet at first, but destined to grow. Van der Berg was not a man who heard no. At the boarding gate, surrounded by airline staff and his aides, he tapped his Italian leather shoes impatiently. "I'm a major stakeholder in West African agriculture," he declared, his tone dripping with entitlement. "Rules don't apply to me." He demanded an immediate upgrade, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to bending systems to his will. The gate agents, visibly stressed, tapped frantically on their tablets, but the reality was stark. Every business-class seat was taken. Desperate to appease him, the airline called for a senior flight attendant, Elise Moreau, a poised woman in her late 30s, her Air France uniform impeccable, her smile polished but cold. She strode onto the plane with purpose, her eyes sweeping the cabin like a hawk searching for prey. They lingered briefly on a dark-skinned man in seat 2A. Ibrahim Traoré sat calmly, reading a report on his phone, his demeanor serene, his attire unassuming. A jacket, no jewelry, no hint of authority. Elise leaned toward a junior attendant and whispered, "Likely a booking error." She approached Traoré, her smile tight, her tone polite but edged with condescension. "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass, please?" Traoré looked up, nodded, and handed it over without a word. She examined it, her eyes flicking between the pass and the man before her. The seat number was correct, 2A, but something didn't sit right with her. In her mind, he didn't look like he belonged in business class. She returned moments later, her smile thinner, her voice more direct. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we may need to relocate you to economy to accommodate another passenger. We'll offer compensation." The words landed like a quiet slap, their implication clear. Traoré raised an eyebrow, his voice steady. "Why me?" "No specific reason, sir," Elise replied, her composure straining. "Just a necessary adjustment for a valued guest." "A guest more important than me?" Traoré's tone remained calm, but his eyes held hers, unyielding. Elise froze, her smile faltering. She offered no answer, only a curt nod before turning away. Nearby passengers sensed the tension. A woman glanced up from her book, A man paused his podcast, but no one spoke. Traoré leaned back in his seat, his expression unchanged. "I'll stay where I am," he said simply. Elise was stunned. A passenger like him refusing her? She wasn't accustomed to defiance, especially not from an African traveller on her watch. Her pride stung. She forced another smile, but her voice grew colder. "Sir, I must insist. This is for operational reasons." Traoré met her gaze again, unflinching. "If it's operational, explain why I'm the only one being asked." Her hesitation betrayed her. She hadn't expected such composed resistance. The cabin grew quieter as passengers tuned in. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A young woman stopped typing. Something felt off, but no one intervened. Van der Berg, still at the gate, awaited his seat, his impatience mounting. Elise marched to the cockpit, whispered urgently to the captain, then returned with a new strategy. Ignoring Traoré, she targeted another black passenger in business class, a middle-aged man in a neat blazer. "Sir, we need you to move to economy," she said briskly, barely looking at him. The man blinked, confused. "Why me?" Elise offered no explanation, only took his boarding pass. Then she approached another black passenger, a young woman in her 20s, repeating the demand. Her pattern was unmistakable, targeting those who, in her eyes, didn't fit. Her second, and far graver mistake. Traoré watched silently, his face a mask of calm, but his mind was razor-sharp, cataloguing every detail. The humiliation didn't ignite anger, it honed his focus. The young woman, now standing, looked bewildered as Elise pointed to her seat. "This is unfair," she said softly. Elise ignored her, clutching the boarding pass. "Enough," Traoré said, rising from his seat. His voice was low, but carried the weight of authority, cutting through the cabin like a blade. "You're making choices based on appearance, not tickets. That's discrimination." Elise turned, visibly shaken. "Sir, please sit down. You're causing a disturbance." But Traoré's gaze, steady, piercing, fearless, stopped her cold. For a fleeting moment, she felt the weight of his presence, but she dismissed it. To her, he was just a defiant passenger, nothing more. Muttering under her breath in French, "Ces gens, toujours des problèmes," she stormed off, her frustration boiling. Van der Berg was finally ushered aboard, greeted by Elise with exaggerated warmth. "Monsieur, we're resolving the seating issue," she said, handing him a glass of champagne. "You'll be comfortable soon." Traoré, meanwhile, buckled his seatbelt, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than any protest. The world would soon know what had transpired and who had been disrespected. Van der Berg settled into business class, oblivious to the man in 2A. Elise fawned over him, adjusting his seat, offering warm towels, and refilling his glass, her actions screaming, "You are important. That man is not." The plane taxied and lifted off, soaring over French soil, carrying with it a moment that would reverberate across continents. In the cabin, normalcy resumed. Passengers reclined, the seatbelt sign dimmed, and the hum of conversation returned. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Traoré remained composed, gazing out the window at the clouds below. He didn't complain, didn't raise his voice, didn't reveal his identity. He sat like a man who knew the ending of a story others were only beginning to read. Elise avoided him, but his presence gnawed at her. Something about his calm unnerved her, though she pushed it aside. Mid-flight, she approached with a forced smile. "Anything to drink, sir?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Water," Traoré replied, his voice neutral. She nodded and hurried away, offering no apology, no courtesy. Van der Berg, meanwhile, was treated like royalty. Elise laughed at his anecdotes, leaned in as he bragged about transforming Burkina Faso's agriculture. "This country needs our expertise," he said smugly. "Without us, it's just chaos." Elise nodded eagerly, unaware that the man he was disparaging sat just 2 rows away, hearing every word. A Burkinabe nurse, Aissata Traoré, returning to Dédougou, noticed the exchange. She leaned toward her seatmate, a student, and whispered, "That's our president. They're humiliating him and don't even know." The student's eyes widened, but she stayed silent, respecting Traoré's clear desire for discretion. Others in the cabin began to suspect. Small glances, hushed whispers, but no one dared break the silence. Hours passed. The cabin lights dimmed, and most passengers dozed. Traoré remained awake, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his mind steady. He wasn't angry. He was patient, a man who knew justice would come in its time. The plane began its descent into Ouagadougou, the captain announcing their arrival in French and English. Elise moved through the aisle, clipboard in hand, still catering to Van der Berg, while ignoring Traoré entirely. Outside, unseen by the passengers, a formidable scene was unfolding. On the tarmac, a convoy of black SUVs, military trucks, and a presidential escort assembled under the blazing sun. Elite guards stood in formation, their uniforms crisp, their rifles at rest but ready. Burkina Faso's top officials, the ministers of defense, foreign affairs and interior, along with the head of national security, waited in disciplined silence, their faces unreadable. Inside the cabin, nervous whispers spread. "Soldiers outside, are we landing in a conflict?" a British tourist asked, peering out the window. "No, that's protocol," a Burkinabe businessman replied. "Someone important is on board." Van der Berg smirked, adjusting his cufflinks. "Must be for me," he told Elise, who laughed, already planning to escort him off first. She'd even arranged for a priority disembarkation, ensuring he'd bypass the other passengers. But as the plane came to a stop, the atmosphere shifted. Through the windows, passengers saw the presidential guard, standing in perfect formation, their eyes fixed forward. Behind them, the ministers stood like sentinels, unmoving in the heat. Elise glanced out, her smile fading. "What's happening?" she whispered. Van der Berg stood, smoothing his suit. "Clearly this is for me. I told you my work here is significant." Before anyone could move, a tall officer in a black beret boarded, his boots echoing on the cabin floor. He scanned the faces, his presence commanding silence. He stopped at seat 2A and raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Monsieur le Président, welcome home." The cabin froze. A collective gasp rippled through the passengers. Elise's face went pale, her clipboard trembling in her hands. Van der Berg's jaw dropped, his champagne glass nearly slipping. "Pre-president?" he stammered, his voice barely audible. Traoré stood slowly, his movements deliberate, his dignity unshakable. He said nothing, only nodded to the officer. Another official stepped forward, his voice cold and precise, addressing Elise and Van der Berg. "You two will accompany us immediately." "Wait, what?" Elise whispered, her voice cracking. "Why me?" "You have publicly disrespected the head of state on Burkinabe soil," the officer said sharply. "That is a grave offense." Van der Berg took a step back, his arrogance crumbling. "There's been a misunderstanding," he sputtered. "I'm a partner to your government." Traoré turned, offering Van der Berg a brief, measured nod. Not angry, not triumphant, just a man who no longer needed words. He stepped off the plane, greeted by his ministers, guards, and a swelling crowd beyond the airport perimeter, their cheers rising like a tide. Cameras flashed, capturing the return of Burkina Faso's leader, a man who had walked among them as one of their own. Back on the plane, Elise and Van der Berg were led away in handcuffs, their heads bowed, their confidence shattered. Passengers watched in stunned silence as they disappeared down the jetway, the weight of their actions sinking in. The tarmac shimmered under Burkina Faso's relentless sun, but all eyes were on the two figures being escorted to separate black vehicles. Elise, her Air France scarf askew, and Van der Berg, his tailored suit now a mockery of his status, were surrounded by stone-faced presidential guards. No one spoke to them, not the officers, not the soldiers. The silence was deafening, a testament to power reclaimed and dignity defended. Inside the terminal, Traoré addressed a small press gathering, his voice calm but resonant, each word carrying the weight of history. In Burkina Faso, we measure a person by their character, not their skin or their wealth. We reject the shadows of colonial arrogance and embrace the dignity of our people. This is the Africa we are building. The story spread like a brushfire. Leaked videos surfaced online, grainy footage of the military salute, the handcuffs snapping on Elise and Van der Berg, the CEO's humiliated expression as he was led away. Social media erupted. Respect Africa and Burkina Rising trended globally, with millions sharing clips and memes. They thought they could disrespect him. They forgot whose land this is, one post read, garnering thousands of shares. African youth across the continent celebrated, their pride palpable in every tweet, every video, every rally. At the Ministry of Justice, Elise and Van der Berg faced formal charges: public insult, discrimination, abuse of power, and disrespect on Burkinabe soil. The Dutch embassy scrambled to intervene, as did Air France's corporate office, issuing frantic calls to Ouagadougou. But Traoré's response was unequivocal. This is not a colony, this is a sovereign nation. Justice is blind to status. Air France released a tepid statement, a corporate apology laced with vague regret and promises of internal reviews. It was too little, too late. Burkinabe citizens launched a boycott campaign, joined by activists in Mali, Senegal, and Ghana. "No more Air France until they respect us," read signs at protests outside the airline's offices in Ouagadougou. The hashtag #boycott Air France gained traction, costing the airline millions in bookings within days. In a detention center on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, Elise sat in a stark room, her uniform replaced by plain clothes. During questioning, she broke down, tears streaming. "I didn't know he was the president," she sobbed. "I was just doing my job." The investigator, a stern woman with decades of service, leaned forward. "You didn't need to know his title. You needed to treat him as a human being. Your prejudice was your crime." Van der Berg, held in a separate facility, tried to leverage his connections, making calls to diplomats and corporate allies. But the Burkinabe court was unmoved. "No immunity, no exceptions," the judge declared. "Justice is equal here." His company issued a statement distancing itself from his actions, but the damage was done, his reputation in tatters, his influence eroded. The fallout extended beyond Burkina Faso. In Europe, the incident sparked debates about lingering colonial attitudes in corporate and travel industries. Activists in Paris and Amsterdam held solidarity marches, demanding accountability. In Africa, the story became a rallying cry, a symbol of resistance against disrespect and entitlement. Universities in Nigeria and Kenya hosted panels titled "The New Africa, Dignity Over Deference," with Traoré's calm defiance cited as a model for leadership. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré returned to the presidential palace, his focus unshaken. He met with youth leaders to discuss tech initiatives, inspected new irrigation systems in rural villages, and strengthened military training programs. He never spoke of the flight again, never gloated, never sought to amplify the incident for personal gain. But the story took on a life of its own. It became legend: a quiet man in a jacket, an attendant blinded by bias, a CEO undone by hubris, and a landing that shook the world. Schoolchildren in Burkina Faso recounted it in classrooms, poets wove it into verses, and musicians composed songs about the man in 2A. The incident was more than a moment. It was a movement, a declaration that Africa would no longer tolerate disrespect, no matter how subtle or systemic. Months later, at a regional summit in Addis Ababa, a journalist asked Traoré about the flight. He smiled faintly, his eyes steady. "I am not defined by one journey," he said. But if that day taught the world to see us differently, then it was a journey worth taking.